So, a few weeks ago, I found myself agreeing to something I did not want to do. Just a work commitment on a Sunday afternoon. And as I said yes, I had a thought that I couldn't quite let go of. Does this build anything? Not like financially, but just does saying yes to this thing produce something that compounds? Or does it pay once and end, leaving me exactly where I was before, just with less Sunday? So I sat with that question for a while, and then I decided to run it as a deliberate experiment for a week. Every significant decision I made filtered through one question: does this build equity? So I want to share what happened because the experiment surfaced something I wasn't expecting. First, I want to be precise about what I mean by equity here, because the financial version is too narrow for what I was actually testing. Equity, for the purposes of this experiment, means anything that compounds. Anything where the input now produces a return that continues after the input stops. So, that includes 4 categories. Financial equity, right? Investments, income streams, savings. Then there's skill equity. Maybe I'm more capable of using a skill, building something in the future. Then there's relational equity. So relationships that are genuinely reciprocal and sustaining over time. And health equity. So physical and mental capacity that I will need for the long game. Now, the opposite of equity in this framework is consumption. Things that pay once and then end. Entertainment, right? Obligations that cost time without producing anything that compounds. Now, consumption is not bad. Taking a rest is not bad. The experiment was not about eliminating these things. It was about being conscious of the ratio of consumption and equity. Now, there were 3 rules for the week. Rule 1: apply the filter to every significant decision. Not micro decisions, but anything that costs more than 30 minutes of time or a meaningful amount of money. Rule number 2: if the answer is no, like this doesn't build equity, I can still say yes to it. The experiment is not about just refusing things, it's just being conscious about my choices. So knowing that the answer is no and choosing to proceed anyway is very different from not asking that question. And rule number 3: log every decision and its verdict. Not really in long detail, but just the decision, the answer, and what I chose. So I recorded 7 days of decisions. Let me read out some of them. On Monday, a colleague asked me to review their presentation. This does not build equity, but I said yes anyway, because it's kind of borderline relational equity, right? On Monday, my decision was to do editing for this week's video. Does that build equity? Yes, because it is giving me skills, and in a slow way it is financial equity building as well. On Tuesday, I had a 2-hour meeting that could have been an email. Does this build equity? Nope. But I attended it as I had no choice. On Tuesday, I went for an evening run. That builds equity, yes, health equity, so non-negotiable. On Wednesday, I had an impulse buy. It was an item I wanted but didn't really need, so it didn't build equity. So I said no to it. I think that was the first clean refusal of the week. Also on Wednesday, I read for an hour on a topic that is directly relevant to this channel. So it builds equity. That was an easy yes. On Thursday, I had a social event I had already agreed to. So low energy, but also low return. Building equity, so-so. But I went, it was a prior commitment, and I logged it. On Thursday again, I had an extra hour on a work project that wasn't really mine, didn't really build equity, so I said no. And that really was the hardest no of the week. I usually like to help out. On Friday, coffee catch up with a friend. Builds equity? Yes. On Friday, watching 2 hours of TV. That was pure consumption, but I did it anyway and deliberately. Not guilty, right? Not feeling guilty about that. On Saturday, I worked on this channel for a few hours, and I think that builds equity. I think it was kind of the most productive hours of the week. And on Sunday, I tried to take time off. Again, deliberately. It didn't build equity, but taking a rest from even thinking about doing something, I think is maybe in the long run even in the health equity, but that's difficult to decide. So that was my experiment. Now, there were 3 things this week made visible that I didn't know before. Firstly, most of my equity negative time isn't chosen. They were commitments made weeks, maybe even months ago, obligations that just accumulated before I could even apply the filter. The meeting I couldn't skip, right? The event I'd already agreed to. So the experiment didn't give me back the time, it's just made me see it clearly and, well, maybe I can use it in the future. Second, the hardest no's are always internal. So saying no to the impulse buy was easy, but saying no to the extra work project that wasn't mine, but where saying yes would have just looked good, now that was difficult. So I say yes to things that cost time when the yes produces social approval, even when the time cost is real. And third, this is the one I keep thinking about, the equity building hours were the best hours of the week. They weren't the easiest, like working on the channel on Saturday, they were the most effortful hours of the week, but they left something behind, right? They are building something slowly. Like the hours spent watching TV, the meeting I had to attend, they will be gone without me remembering them, but putting those hours into this channel, they are still here in the form of something that exists, that it didn't exist before. So, you know how the saying is, time is money? Well, time is more like soil. What matters isn't how much you have, it's what you're growing in it. Now, I expected this experiment to show me that I was spending too much time on consumption. That was my hypothesis. But what it actually showed me was more specific, maybe more uncomfortable than that. It showed me that I have enough time. I don't have a time shortage problem. What I have is you can call it a commitment inheritance problem. A backlog of yeses I said months ago that are now consuming my present. And the filter in the present can't really help with those. The only thing that helps with those is not creating new ones. So I believe this experiment wasn't really about just 1 week. It was to help me see not the mistakes, but things I could improve. And understanding that the freedom to choose how I spend my time is mostly determined not by this week's decisions alone, but maybe even by last month's decisions. That's the thing I really didn't see coming, and that's the thing I feel like I want to improve on. So You guessed it, homework time. So pick one day this week, if possible tomorrow or the closest day you can, and apply the equity filter to every significant decision. Now again, just try it for one day. You don't need to say no to anything, as I did. You don't need to change anything, but just ask the question and write down the answer. Does this action or thing build equity, either financial, skill, relational, or health? Just a yes or no. So one day of honest answers will tell you more about how you're actually spending your time than any productivity system I've encountered. Now, the equity filter is something I'm going to keep using. Just a question to come back to remind myself of my maybe goals or dreams. And it is a good question, I think. It really gives the most honest answers. And maybe in a few weeks I'll run this experiment again and maybe even share whether the picture has changed. But yes, there is a lot more to build, and let's keep on building. Let me know in the comment section. How is your day? Are you building equity or are you consuming? Okay, and then I will see you next week. Bye.